Hey everyone, welcome to the webinar today. Thank you to everyone who's here bang on time for the start of the session. We're also having some chat come through in the chat already, which is nice to see, and I'm sure we'll have a few more people joining us over the next couple of minutes. So while they continue to join, I'll introduce our guest for today. So I'm delighted to be joined by Fred Vallaeys, CEO of Optmyzr, author, one of the true OG veterans of the PPC industry. So how are you doing today, Fred?
I'm good. It's morning here in California, 8:30. Just made it into the studio, having my first cup of coffee. Thanks for having me on, and I'm looking forward to a fun discussion here.
Same. And I was on LinkedIn the other day, and I really loved the intro of the video you recently recorded with Ginny Marvin. I was not expecting to see you come out on a segue. That caught me by surprise, but I was wondering, does the segue only come out on special occasions, or is that a routine method of transport?
No, I proudly identify as a nerd, but it is maybe a little hyper nerdy to run around for special occasions. And the cool thing is actually, so that was Larry and Sergey's segue at Google. So it's very old. The battery doesn't last very long anymore. So it was about 10 minutes of shooting with Ginny Marvin, and then the battery went dead. So
a vintage segue. Yeah, there's not many of those around.
Yeah.
That was a really good interview that you did with Ginny, by the way, and I included the link to that interview for everyone that's watching. You can find that in the docs tab. So anyone that does want to go check out Fred's full-length conversation with Ginny about some of the announcements from GML. You can find it there in the docs tab. One of the other things, Fred, I know we spoke about it briefly, was you're going to be in Manchester at the end of this month at the PerformanceMCR event. And as far as I remember, last time we spoke, you're also traveling to Austria or Europe. Is that correct?
Yeah, so next week I'm going to be at SMX Advanced in Boston. Tickets are still available. And then I'm going to Austria for vacation. My wife is Austrian, but I'm actually going to start off in Cannes, so the Cannes Marketing Festival. Going to go hang out at the Google Beach, the Microsoft Beach, the Port Amazon, have a bunch of good meetings there. And then from there, I'm going to Manchester for the MCR conference. Looking forward to that. I'm a fan of one of the football teams in that city. I'm not going to say which one, but excited to go to that one. And then a bit of vacation and then back to California.
Amazing. Well, I'm really looking forward I'm hoping, Fred, to catch you in person at the Manchester event. I'm going to be there with a videographer from the team here at Lunio, and we're going to be capturing some little Vox Pop interviews with some of the speakers. So it'd be great to catch you if I can for 10 or 5 minutes on the day. Yeah, we'll get some content recorded there too. But we have had a few more people join the live session now, which is great. So I'll just get going with some housekeeping. So again, welcome everyone. We're very glad to have you here if you're watching live or if you're watching back on demand. For those that don't know me, I'm James. I'm the content lead at Lunio. I'll be hosting the webinar today. We're aiming to get through all the content in around 50 minutes with some time left at the end for Q&A, which I'll say more about in just a second. Just a few other quick bits of housekeeping before we get into today's agenda. We are recording the session today, and it will be available to watch back on demand. So that will be landing in your inbox post-event. If you have any questions for Fred, please pop them into the dedicated Q&A tab so that they don't get lost and buried in the regular chat. And we'll try and get around to as many of those as we can at the end of the session. And with that in mind, you can upvote questions you're interested in, which always helps me prioritize which ones to ask first. So if someone else has asked a question that you're interested in, please do make use of the upvote button. The other thing to say is we've also got lots of really useful resources to share today in the Docs tab here in Goalcast. And I'll be directing your attention there at relevant parts of the session so you can get more context and some resources and guides that relate to some of the content that we'll be covering. In the doc section, you can also find the link to Fred's LinkedIn profile. So on the small chance that you're not already connected with him, you can follow him to get all the latest updates on the future of paid media. Throughout the session, we'll be running a few audience polls as well, which you can vote on in the polls tab, which will open in just a second. So please do give us your responses there. You should see a notification pop up whenever a new poll is open for responses, and you can respond by clicking on the polls tab and submitting your answer. So on that note, I'm just going to open the first poll question here, and I'm going to share this one on screen, just with the caveat that the others won't actually appear on screen like this one. But you will see a notification pop up. So the first poll relates to Google Marketing Live this year, which was obviously heavily AI focused, meaning it's quite relevant to our topic of discussion today. So the question is, what was your take on GML this year? Just interested to see your guys' responses. And while we're waiting for those responses to come in, Fred, I'd love for you to give us a quick summary of your perspective and key takeaways from GML 2025.
Yeah, maybe I'll put myself in that second bucket, James. So it was interesting because they actually did the most exciting announcements were pre-announced 2 weeks prior to GML. So that was more data coming to Performance Max campaigns, and it was the introduction of Search Max, which they then ended up naming AI Max, which is basically a way to start playing on generative search results, your existing search campaigns. Those were the two big ones. And when they pre-announced those to us, I was like, I was talking to the Google people, and I was like, what are you going to say on stage that's going to like blow our minds? And so I think like we usually see, what's saved for the stage is maybe that future vision. It's a lot of the video, more of the image stuff. And what was nice this year was that video generation has come quite a long way, clearly, but they're also saying they're going to make it possible at scale. Because that's always the big question for me, is when they show stuff about creating a video ad. Well, great, but what if I have to make 1,000 video ads? Or what if I'm an agency and I have a dozen clients? Like, I'm not going to sit there and do all of these things manually, right? If I haven't done them before, I don't necessarily have the bandwidth and the capacity and the workflows to do this. So it's nice to see them think about a little bit of scale. And then I thought the most sort of interesting and purely exciting, even though it's probably a little bit of vaporware at this point, but it was the last demo that was done by Staley Song at the very end of the keynote. And by the way, I don't know if everyone watched the same keynote, because I know there were different. There was a US one and there was an Irish one, and I was in the US one in Mountain View. But what she showed was a demo of a marketing agent. And what was really cool is that it was taking the whole LLM principle, and Saline was talking to it, and she was saying, hey, listen, why do I not have any conversions in my campaign? And the agent looked at her account and identified that the tracking pixel hadn't been set up. But then it went one step further and it said, well, it looks like you're using a Wix website. So how about I go and install it for you? And that's really that future vision, that big promise of, all of these logistical connecting the dots, all this tedious work that we have to do. If the agent can do that for us based on us telling it what it needs to do, you figure it out, go and do it. Like, don't bother me, right? Just make sure it works. If that is actually possible, like, that's really exciting. So I was on the Google campus, and then we had product meetings afterwards with some of the PMs. And it sounded like that was not in the immediate future, but maybe we'll get there at some point.
Yeah, it's the pace of change is really crazy, and even some of the stuff we'll get onto later in the session today, it's impressive how far we've come in a short space of time. I will leave it there. I mean, most people, just a quick comment on the poll, most people kind of followed your sentiment, Fred. The vast majority of the audience fallen into that second bucket of, yeah, some cool stuff and people generally interested and positive sentiment off the back of GML. But that is all the housekeeping out of the way, and I'm just going to bring the agenda up on screen here. So we have 8 main points on the agenda today. So firstly, we will compare some of the most popular LLMs of 2025, because although we will default to talking about ChatGPT in this session, the advice is largely cross-applicable to different LLMs as well. And I'll also direct you towards a very helpful and interesting comparison resource, which allows you to see exactly how different LLMs compare to each other in terms of accuracy, pricing, speed, and more. Next, we'll talk about how to craft better prompts. Fred has lots of useful advice there when it comes to making the most of custom GPTs. And to close out that section, we also have a very helpful prompt example supplied by Adriaan Dekker, who I'm sure many of you in the audience will know from LinkedIn. So you can see the level of detail and specificity that can be required when trying to get the best out of LLMs. Then we'll quickly cover some emerging PPC and AI experts who are very active on LinkedIn and sharing lots of helpful insights and resources. So you might want to consider following those guys. And one of those experts actually used ChatGPT to build 7 very helpful Google Ad scripts. And the link to all of those scripts can be found in the Docs tab if you want to use them. I can see some people in the chat, the sound seems to have gone for some people, but some people, the sound can hear me. I do apologize if you can't hear me or Fred. I'm not sure what's going on there, but it seems like most people are okay with the sound. So I'm just going to continue on. After that, we will then look at how to connect your ads data to GenAI for smarter PPC. And Fred is going to walk us through 4 different methods you can use to achieve that, depending on your current level of technical ability. And also thank you to everyone in the chat there confirming that they can hear okay. Apologies again if you can't. I'm not sure what's going on there. Then we'll very briefly look at and consider the next phase of GenAI and PPC and what that'll look like as we move from automation to predictive anticipation. And towards the end of the session, we'll cover pitfalls and cautions you need to be aware of when using GenAI for PPC and explain why taking very aggressive shortcuts can end up being very costly. And then to wrap up the content, we'll look at emerging data showing how LLMs and AI are feeding into a surge in the amount of bot activity online and how that contributes to growing amounts of wasted ad spend. So that's it for the agenda today. So I'll move on to our next slide here, which is just a very quick plug for the podcast that I recorded with Fred a few weeks ago now. It was on the same topic, how you can use ChatGPT to get better results in PPC. And essentially today's webinar, we want to do a deeper dive into some of the things that we addressed on the podcast and also provide some resources that will help you put that advice into action. You can scan the QR code here and go straight to that episode, or you can click on the link in the Docs tab. We've just launched season 2 of the Paid Media Lab, and we have a brilliant lineup of guests, and we'll be releasing a new episode every Wednesday now until the end of July. We just dropped one today with Kirk Williams, who I'm sure some of you watching will be familiar with. So all I would say is if you find today's webinar useful and helpful, then do consider subscribing on YouTube or Spotify to the podcast, as I guarantee you'll get lots more tips and insights on all sorts of paid media topics from our guests. Myself and the rest of the content team here at Lunio do put a lot of time and effort into making sure every episode has a clearly defined focus with lots of actionable takeaways. And we're incredibly grateful to every single one of our guests, including Fred, who've made the time to appear on the show and share their expertise freely. So again, if you find this session helpful, please do go and check out the Paid Media Lab. And with that, let's compare some of the most popular LLMs of 2025. So as I mentioned before, in this session, we'll talk mostly about ChatGPT. But as I said, I think it would be remiss not to acknowledge that there are lots of other options out there. So just before I pass over to you, Fred, to get your perspective and take on some of these, I just want to very quickly let people know that in the Docs tab, you will find a link that says LLM comparison matrix. That's where the chart that you can see on the slide comes from, where each model is ranked according to its intelligence index here, with ChatGPT coming out on top. This is provided by Artificial Analysis, and on their site, you'll find LLM models ranked according to all sorts of attributes you might be interested in, such as pricing, speed, accuracy, and more. So well worth bookmarking that if it's an area you're interested in. I'm pretty sure that's updated on an almost daily basis too, which is impressive. So Fred, first of all, have you ever come across this comparison matrix from Artificial Analysis before? And do you pay much attention to how these different models stack up against each other?
No, honestly, I hadn't really looked at this index. There's also the Hugging Face indexes that they frequently put out. And I think in the beginning, after ChatGPT had come out and then we started playing with Anthropic and Claude, I was sort of going back and forth between models quite a bit. And maybe I did care about which one was benchmarking the best. But what you ultimately ended up seeing was, I think Google got on stage at I/O and said, hey, Gemini is now the best one. And literally the next day, it was one of the competitors. I was like, well, like you said, these things are updated daily. They just come out with a new one, and that was now the best one. And so chasing the best one is just going to take so much of your effort when it's constant leapfrogging. And at some level, this is becoming commoditized. All of them use the same underlying technology. They have the same similar capabilities. And it's almost like saying, am I going to use Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, right? It has different nuances and they have different release cycles. So some of them will have newer features first, but at the end of the day, they're all headed the same way. And it's almost like saying which electricity vendor I'm going to use for my office building. It's like at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much. Now, that said, I mean, I do know there is work being done on things like GPT-5, and that one is supposed to be radically different. And so some of the architecture is going to change there. And so at that point, then you could start to see differentiation that is perhaps a bit more meaningful. Yeah, I was going to say, I know you have questions, but the other thing is like a cost consideration, right? So if you're constantly chasing the latest and greatest model, well, these are also the most expensive ones. And in digital marketing, I have done keyword generation, and sure, I could use the new one and the expensive one, but the older model that's 2 years old still does just as good of a job for keyword generation because that's not that difficult of a task. That's just like semantic analysis and giving you some variations. When it comes to stuff like, oh, can you help me do a seasonality analysis of data? That's where this artificial analysis intelligence comes in because it does need to understand how things connect to each other. It needs to be able to do some statistics. It needs to be able to build Python code to run it, right? And that's where you might want to spend a little bit more money on a more expensive model. Now, the other key sort of little point here, but when I say how much does it cost, most of you probably use these tools through a subscription. So you pay $20 a month, $30 a month, whatever. But once you start thinking about how do I scale this? How do I bring it into my business? Maybe build it into a little tool, a piece of software that we can scale across the agency. Then you're going to look at API costs. And that's where it does matter quite a bit. I mean, you're going to see models that cost 100 times as much as a different model. So if you can use a model that's just or almost as good for that task, but it's 100 times cheaper, that's a significant business optimization.
For sure, that's a really good point. Fred, I've heard some people talk about Meta's Llama and the fact that it's open source. Admittedly, like I don't know a huge amount about it, but is there anything that's going to make Llama from Meta unique to the other four that we can see on the slide here, or is it going to be very similar?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be pretty similar. And so their model was based on a smaller training model. And that keeps growing as well, right? But it was a smaller training model. And I think they had some additional privacy and policy in place to make it a little bit more of a more conservative model, I think. And when I say conservative, it just means you're taking less risk. If you're, say, generating ad text, it's going to do less weird stuff than other models. Now, if you do use the APIs to play with any of this, there is like this setting called the temperature. The temperature is basically a setting between 0 and 1 that tells the model how creative it can be. Should it be completely deterministic or should it be very creative? And what that means is if you ask it a question, it can make up the answer for something that you might find pleasing. But that's not deterministic, that's creative, right? Or you could say just like try to replicate something that you've seen frequently before. So the chances that it's wrong are going to be much less. And that's a lower temperature score in that case. So that's one way that you could use it. And then what's nice about Llama, like you said, it's open source. So it is a model that if you want to deploy something commercially, that might be a viable option to look at.
Nice. Thanks for that, Fred. That was something that I've heard talked about, but I didn't really know much about it. But we will move on to the next topic here. So this is a topic that we did cover on the podcast. So advice on crafting better prompts. So Fred, would you mind just taking us through again what your top level advice would be when it comes to trying to get more specific and precise with your prompts to get better outputs?
Yeah, so like in the very early days of ChatGPT, everybody was talking about prompt engineering becoming like this new skill. And I thought that was like BS to some degree, but I've come around and now I think it's actually more important. And the reason that I didn't like it in the beginning is that And I still have reservations about it, but basically, like, we have this amazing large language model and chat capability, and we have to learn how to prompt in a very specific way to get it to do what we need it to do. And that's almost like, if you think back to how we do Google searches, we all have a way of doing that, but it's not a natural way of speaking. But we've all become conditioned and trained to do it in a specific way that gives us the results that we know we want to get. And now with prompt engineering, it's sort of the same thing, right? We're learning this new way of speaking English or whatever language you speak to communicate to the machine what it is that you want to get at. But that's sort of dumb, because the machine should be able to figure out what it is you meant, and you shouldn't have to prompt in a certain way. And that's where we're seeing these interesting things like pre-prompting. So you give it a little prompt and you ask it to make that little prompt into a better prompt. And then eventually, once the prompt is really ready, that's when you give it to the machine, and that's when you get it to do the work. And so a simple example of that for me is if I'm playing with one of these video tools and I'm super excited, like I want to make a cool video, right? But I don't know how to describe what it is that I want. And so I'll type in, can you make me a funny cat video? Okay, and then the next level of prompt will say, okay, well, how about the cat is doing this, and it's in this sort of setting, and this is what's happening, and this is the color of the cat, and the cat. So it describes all these things, and that gets you then thinking about, oh, well, I didn't mean for a black cat to be in the video. I wanted to be a tabby, or I wanted it to be like in a field, and so you start to think, and again, you can then layer these prompts, and eventually it gets to be the prompt, a very long prompt that could be very good. Now, the other illustration of this is I know some people who work at OpenAI, and the way that they're doing coding these days is basically by talking to the machines. It's vibe coding. But what's fascinating is the length of the prompts that they are doing is just like mind blowing. It could be a 10,000 word prompt to do code building. And in a way, it makes sense, because if you're an engineer, or if you're any project you work on with a more junior person, the better you can describe what it is you want them to do, the better the outcome, in a way, right? You're putting boundaries and you're being very restrictive about what you're asking them for. And so that makes the machine then do the work in exactly the way that you wanted it to be done. Right. And so there's this whole notion, I think, did we put it on here? But this notion that think of the LLM as the smartest person in the world. They know everything because it has ingested the whole internet. And so if you ask it a question, it can go into any realm of answering that question. And so let me take a classic example, which is, tell me something about Java. Well, if you don't tell it that you care about Java coffee or Java the island or Java as in like the coding language, it's going to decide what it's going to talk about. But if you get more restrictive and you say, tell me about Java the island, okay, well, you're taking that huge knowledge thing and you're getting it to zoom in on a smaller area of that large language model, the knowledge that lives in there. And now it's answering from this specific region, which has all the information about the thing that you wanted. And the more that you restrict on top of that, the more creative you force it to be, right? And so you could do unexpected things like, well, I can't think of an unexpected thing now, but again, the more that you ask it an unusual question, that's where the creativity comes out, because you're forcing it into an area where it's not in that big bubble, but it's in a smaller bubble.
Yeah, for sure. And when we were talking about this on the podcast, and we've put it on the slide here, you have some really interesting ways that you use custom GPTs to save time and kind of do the pre-prompting up front, and then ensure that the outputs that you're getting from that particular custom GPT are more in line for what you're looking for. So before you move on, could you say just a little bit about how you tend to use custom GPTs?
Yeah, so custom GPTs are basically, so all the different systems have this, but a custom GPT is in OpenAI. You can build a GPT where you've given it some instructions ahead of time. So you tell it to behave like a certain persona, to avoid certain words, to use a certain language, and you put these restrictions in place. And so what I've done, for example, when I write a blog post, I want it to be reviewed by a custom GPT, but not just one of them. I said I would love to get the feedback from a skeptical reader. So I built a custom GPT who I've trained to be a skeptical reader. And then I've got a different one that I've trained to be a CMO. and then a different one who's a junior account manager, and then I got a proofreader, and I got a fact checker, and I got all of these different custom GPTs who have specified this is how you behave. This is the kind of feedback I want about my blog posts. And so now what I can do is I can call these individually, and I can say, hey, custom GPT, like fact check this article. Make sure I'm not saying anything that seems like a little bit dubious. And that's cool, but I find myself at the end of that is like, well, now I've got 5 custom GPTs and I need to put this prompt in 5 times, and then I need to consolidate what they say. So here's the trick. In OpenAI, you can use a new chat thread and you can add mention. And when you add mention, the custom GPTs become available. And so what I do is I say, here's my PDF of a blog post that I've written. And then I add mention each of the individual custom GPTs. I tell them, go and evaluate this, but I don't even read the responses. What I do at the very end is I have a 6th custom GPT, and that one's job is to take the feedback in that memory, in that thread that we've now built, and it consolidates all that feedback. And if something persistently comes out and people are like, well, you know, this point we don't really believe, then it'll come back and say, they generally seem to agree that this is a paragraph that you should update. And so that saves me time. Now, that was still manual. And James, when we get to vibe coding a little bit later, I'll share an example of how I took that idea and I made it like fully automated using, of course, using LLMs, so I wouldn't have to actually write the code to do this.
Nice. Yeah, looking forward to getting into that. Just 2 helpful resources just to follow on in terms of prompting. So I just wanted to direct you quickly to both of these. So the first is a LinkedIn article from Charlene Lee, who runs a very popular newsletter on LinkedIn called Leading Disruption. The second is a Reddit thread, which contains a very helpful prompt for getting ChatGPT to engineer its own prompts and outputs. Basically, like the idea here is that you can ask the model itself to say you're trying to achieve or create X, and what inputs do you need to provide and how do you need to structure your prompt to get the best output. I'm not going to go over the article in full. And obviously the Reddit prompt, you can go to the docs tab, you can go to that Reddit thread and you can copy and paste that prompt that user has provided there and save that for later use. But that's pretty much it. I'm just going to go on very quickly to another example. So as I mentioned in the intro, as I was preparing for this session, I had a quick call with Adriaan Dekker, who, as I'm sure many of you will know and recognize his face for sure from LinkedIn. But I just wanted to speak with him because I know he's paying really close attention to this area. He's got his finger on the pulse in terms of identifying what the best resources are and emerging experts on this topic. But he also shared this example of a prompt, which you can find in the docs tab. And this is just to give you an idea of how specific and granular you need to be oftentimes to get good outputs. Adriaan did stress that this prompt isn't intended to be some kind of magic bullet that is going to magically do all your strategy work for you without any further input or oversight from you. But it is intended to give you an indication of how you might want to go about creating and structuring some of your own prompts. And of course, big thanks and shout out to Adriaan for helping me prepare for this session and all the work he does to keep the wider PPC community up to date with the latest news and developments. One other thing that we'll go on to is on the slide here. You can see 3 marketers, which Adriaan recommends you should check out. When I was having the call with him, he recommended all 3 of these creators as guys who are doing a lot of interesting things around the application of PPC in AI, on top of Fred, of course. So all the links to the 3 LinkedIn posts that you can see on the slide here are listed in the docs tab under the author's names. You can check out the original posts, which are useful in their own right, but I do recommend you follow these creators too. So the first post from Geert outlines how you can use Google's bulk upload templates, add them to Cursor, write a rule on Cursor on how you should use those templates to build campaigns at speed. If you haven't used Cursor before, I haven't used Cursor before, but we have included a link to that in the docs tab. But Fred, I wanted to just ask you, have you experimented with Cursor and how do you find using it?
So I've not used Cursor, but I have used technologies like it. So Cursor is basically going to use generative AI to help you do coding. And there's this whole new concept called vibe coding, which is coding without actually writing code, but just by prompting to your LLM. The ones that I particularly like are v0.dev and lovable.ai. The reason that I like those two is that they will actually generate the code and let you execute it within your browser. So if you're building an app or you're building a web application, you don't have to install anything. Cursor, you do have to install an app before it runs, right? So it's a little bit of a heavier lift. Cursor, I think, also tends to be used a little bit more by developers. And then there's other systems, like there's a Copilot for Visual Studio that some developers will use. There's Codex now, which is the new one from OpenAI. So that one I'm particularly excited about because the people at OpenAI are using their own tool to code. So I think there's going to be a very fast evolution there of it getting better. And there's also a lot of information being shared about how they use that best. Like, how do you make the prompts? How do you put it all together? But I think for the audience here, to really get some hands-on experience with how can we get an LLM to write something for us, probably start with V0 or Lovable. And all of these have free plans where you can do a couple of prompts per day that will get you somewhere with something working. And then 20, 30 bucks a month gets you to that next level where you can build really cool things. But the other way you can sort of get a flavor of this is if you go to Claude. You can go to Claude and you can say, build me a web app, which is a quiz about some topic. And it'll actually generate the JavaScript. It'll generate beautiful screens, and all of that is going to be testable inside the browser. But it is a bit restrictive because every time the code gets too long, it'll prompt you and it'll say, hey, do you want me to continue writing this code? And that's where I think Lovable and V0, they just do all the work. They will generate multiple files for you. And so it's a little bit nicer. V0 I've even used to build Chrome extensions. So I've never built a Chrome extension in the past, but there's plenty of Chrome extensions that I wish I had. And sometimes it's out there, but it's like doesn't have good reviews. So I'm like, am I giving my data to someone? I'd rather just have it myself and know what's happening here. And so V0 builds the code, explains how to install it. If there's an error in the code, it'll troubleshoot it. So it's been really fantastic for that. And I think the other thing maybe to talk about here is there's a bit of a mind shift that happens. So I've written a lot of scripts for Google Ads, and I've always written scripts when I was thinking, okay, this is a task that I do repetitively, I do it very frequently, or it takes a lot of time, but on an ongoing basis. So the expectation was always that a script that I would write, that I would invest time in building, would have to at least be usable for the next year, maybe 2 years. Now with vibe coding and systems like what we're describing here, that doesn't have to be the case anymore. I mean, it's literally, if I would have had to spend 2 hours doing a task one time, it is faster for me to go to V0 and build a quick Chrome extension in 15 minutes. And sure, it's not going to be like the most secure, and sure, it's not going to be something I can publish and have other people use, but it's throwaway code. And that's fine because now I've done in 15 minutes what would have taken me 2 hours otherwise. And that's just sort of a paradigm shift in terms of everybody can have the benefit of the scalability of code that just didn't exist in the past. So I'm super excited about that.
Nice. And just to follow on from that point, just Mark Cornelius on the screen here, he has used ChatGPT to build quite a lot of scripts. He built a lot throughout 2024. And he recapped all those on his website and shared them with the PPC community for free, which is very helpful. If you want to see all those Google Ads scripts that Mark created, you can find the link to his website in the Docs tab. And then the third and final post that we can see on the slide here is from Alfred Simon, where he's recorded a short video on how AI created a better conversion tracking setup than Google's own current system. It's quite a funny little video if you get a chance to watch it. But Alfred has also been doing a lot of experimenting with AI agents as well. And he's also created a YouTube video where he outlines a solid beginner's guide to creating your first AI agent with no coding required. Again, the link to that YouTube video is in the Docs tab. Fred, before we move on, is that something that you've ever tried to experiment with, like building AI agents, or is that something that you look into in the future?
I mean, so I was at a Microsoft event yesterday, and one of the Microsoft people got up on stage and was like, we don't even really know what people mean when they say agents. I mean, it's sort of like the buzzword of the day. So yes, I've probably built agents, and I've maybe haven't built an agent, and like, is it agentic? And I think maybe the basic notion is that it just broadly owns a task for you, and it's not like a single prompt, and maybe you can put different things together. So yeah, I mean, in a certain way, custom GPTs are that, because we can integrate it with backend code base of Optmyzr, for example, and get it to like give actual grounded responses about Google Ads things. But yeah, I mean, agents are sort of the way forward, and it's pretty exciting what we'll be able to do. And again, harkening back to that example from Google with the marketing agent that goes and installs a tracking pixel on Wix, right? That's an agent, and that's pretty cool. But then some of the big questions are going to be around like, how do these agents talk to each other, right? There's one discussion that I keep having. I had it yesterday at Microsoft, had a couple of weeks ago at Google. But like, imagine that you're in the AI mode, and so you're not doing a Google search, but you're in an AI mode having a conversation about what kind of running shoes I need, because I'm like, I'm going to do my first marathon, and I'm not like a long distance runner, so I need something that's going to protect my knees, and I'm not looking to set a personal record, and I like this brand, and I like this color, and blah, blah, blah. You have the whole conversation, and it comes out, it's like, okay, here's the shoes that you probably need. Now it passes you off, because you can't buy these on ChatGPT, so now it has to pass you off to a website, and then the website's like, hey, welcome to adidas.com. How can we help you? And it's like, I just had this whole conversation with the chat agent. Like, these are the shoes I need. Like, take me that last step of the way. And obviously, if it's just like about purchasing, you'll go to the right landing page. But it's like there's going to be this disconnect, right? And we have to get these agents to talk to each other so that the human does. It's not like calling a service line and getting passed around 5 times, and every time you have to re-explain why you're calling them. Like, that's so annoying. And that's currently an unsolved problem in all of these chat agents. But yeah, we'll definitely be looking at that and trying to do our best to connect the systems together and make sure everything is streamlined.
Yeah, for sure. So if we just move on to the next topic, so I'll pass very quickly over to you on this one, Fred. In April, you wrote this article for Search Engine Land, which people can see on the screen here. And of course, the link to the full article is in the docs tab as well. So Fred, could you maybe talk us through what you really wanted people to take away from this article, and also briefly talk people through the 4 different strategies you proposed here for connecting your ads data to GenAI?
Yeah, I mean, I was already going way deeper in like agent to agent and model context protocols. But the fundamental problem that I was trying to explain in the search engine land post is that LLMs are going to make stuff up. They are going to hallucinate. And when it comes to ads data or SEO data, like, that's a particular problem, right? Because we're talking about actual money for actual clients, and we can't just have stuff made up. So how do you ground the LLM in reality? And that's what they call grounding. Grounding basically means here's your base level truth that you need to work with. And you can talk about stuff related to this, but you can't make stuff up, right? So that's the grounding. So then the question becomes, how do you ground these LLMs in your data? And in the very early days, the first technique was literally to copy and paste, say, your search terms report from Google, and you would put that into the prompt. And what's nice there is that prompts are very understanding. So if you just dump in a CSV, a comma delimited text, it'll understand that that's a CSV. It'll figure out the headers, and you'll be able to work with that. But that was also limiting because you did have the limit of how many words and tokens you can put in a prompt. So then I started thinking about how do I, so if I look at the first one, so what I ended up doing then was I didn't want to manually copy and paste stuff into the prompt. So I wrote some Google ad scripts that will connect, obviously because it's Google ad script, that you can say, give me the search terms report. Then it would connect within the script to OpenAI's API, and it would feed that data in along with the prompt. So you could get some insights and some optimization tip or some reports directly from that actual grounded data. Now there's newer techniques. Now you can obviously attach files, so you can have much bigger data sets. But then we also start thinking about, how does the web become more flexible? And everybody knows what an API is, the application programming interface. So it allows different websites to interact with each other because they understand each other's data. Right, so it's kind of like a transport layer for data. Now, the problem is that LLMs don't have that yet. There's no API for LLMs. And so that limits them in terms of being able to be grounded and pass information back and forth between different systems. And so that's where Anthropic is doing this, what they call the model context protocol. So it's kind of an API that they're developing for large language models. And what's nice is it's not specific to Anthropic. This actually works for Gemini. So Google has integrated this as well. But the key point here is now you could have an agent that you instruct the agent, optimize my Google Ads account. And it knows there's an API, a model context protocol, that it can go and connect to Google Ads. And then it knows which one to use to pull in the ads data. And then it may have a different connector into Optmyzr where we could say, okay, based on that data from Google, these are the strategies that we would use to optimize that. It combines that together. And then maybe there's a third MCP that knows how to put that back into the Google Ads the data store, so it actually goes live. So that's what these MCPs are starting to do, but it's pretty technical. It's not well developed, but it is something to keep an eye on. And then the third one that I have on there is custom GPTs and GPT actions. So GPT actions are a deeper layer inside the custom GPT. So in the custom GPT, you can tell it how to respond, right? So the examples I gave you about be a skeptical reader, well, you can also put in an action. And so the action is kind of like an API again. And here's the simplest example. Say that you're Open Table. You want to build an agent that is able to make restaurant reservations. Well, it can look at restaurants and it can give you advice about which restaurants might suit your culinary preferences, but it doesn't know what tables are available. It needs to have a way to talk to the Open Table system to look at tables and to be able to make the reservation. And so that's where a GPT action can come in, because that can now then say, okay, the user just told me to book this restaurant, and now ChatGPT knows how to talk to the Open Table system through an API-like interface to pull in the availability and actually make the booking, right? So again, that's connecting data and allowing you to take things to that next level. And all of these are pretty complicated. So the fourth one I put on there, which is a little bit promotional, but obviously look at your existing tools like Optmyzr. We're building generative AI capabilities throughout the interface, throughout the tool set. And so you don't have to worry about making sure things are grounded because we're doing that for you. So any tool vendor that you work with, any SaaS that you work with, take a look at how are they using generative AI to make your life easier.
Yeah, it can get quite technical, so that is a massive time saver if you have one of those tools already available. And towards the very end of that article, Fred, there was just a really interesting point that you made that I wanted to touch on here in terms of where we might be going in the next phase of GenAI for PPC. So there was this quote that you included from Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, which I thought was really striking. So on the slide here, we can see what we might mean by this shift from automation to anticipation. So could you talk a little bit about what you mean when we consider this shift from automation to anticipation?
Yeah, and I think that kind of then also leads into maybe more the agentic vision, which is no longer that we're just sitting at the computer issuing one prompt at a time, but it's more that we think of the AI as that helpful assistant who's constantly going to stay on top of whatever task we've given it. And it's also going to be able to coordinate between a number of different assistants, right? And to me, this was the eye-opening thing, was when I started looking at custom GPTs, it was like, I can build one custom GPT for a specific client that I work with. And that's cool. But then I was like, well, if it only took me 2 minutes to build a custom GPT, why am I not building 1,000 custom GPTs and get them to talk to each other? It's like having a company of 1,000 people working for me instead of just having one assistant. And so I think this is also a little bit part of Dario's vision right there, is that all of these things, they're going to have specific tasks. They're going to be built to be really good at these specific tasks, but they know how to work with each other. They know how to be proactive. And if you look at GPT Operator, so that's from OpenAI. That's the thing that actually manipulates a browser. So it'll open up a browser and go and do stuff for you. That one could be scheduled. So you could say every day, go and check on Zillow and look if a specific house that I'm looking to buy is available, right? You send me the list of the latest properties that are available. And kind of a little sidetrack here, but like you would say, well, how's that different from just setting an alert from one of these existing websites? Everybody has alerts and will send you daily updates. Well, Sure, that's cool, but that's deterministic programming. That's basically running filters. So if you think about your search terms, I can send you in Optmyzr a daily report of search terms that have bad performance. And that's cool. But now you as a human, you need to look at that and you need to say, well, actually, this one has bad performance, even though it's super relevant to the business. So it's probably like a relevance issue. Maybe it's a landing page issue. It's not purely the metrics. Whereas other keywords are like, well, okay, obviously that has nothing to do with what we sell. So that is an obvious negative keyword we should be adding. But now you get into, this is no longer deterministic. You need to understand kind of the nuanced, what we as humans do. We look at it and we understand whether it's relevant or not. And this is cool because now you could start combining some of this deterministic programming with the creative programming that is allowed through ChatGPT and LLMs. And you could actually do a lot of this work that used to be done by humans. So now you get that search terms report. These are poorly performing. And we add another layer on top of that that says, and we've also evaluated it, and these don't seem to be relevant. So these should be negative keywords. And then you get to a simple human in the loop, so sort of a system where we as the humans, we just validate the very sophisticated analysis that the machine has done. We validate, we say, this is okay, go ahead and push it. And so this is all part of this future vision of where the machines just do so much more for us. And it's no longer limited to kind of like the single prompt, but it's really helping with bigger tasks.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be really interesting to see how that plays out. And when we look at the next slide here, it really hammers home the bit about the human input and human oversight is essential when we're talking about these things. So Fred, when we recorded the podcast, I asked you about some of the potential risks or pitfalls associated with using GenAI for PPC. And then you outlined that there are three main outcomes that you can achieve when using an LLM, two of which are good and worth pursuing, and a third outcome, which pretty much guarantees you're going to run into problems, whether you're using it for PPC or anything else. They're all listed on the slide here. But could you maybe talk us through the first two more positive outcomes? So using ChatGPT to help you with your existing work to do that faster, and then the second of using ChatGPT to learn new things or achieve new heights.
Yeah, so the first one is maybe the most obvious one that most of us already do. The tasks that we currently do as part of our jobs, could we automate these through an LLM? So if we do keyword analysis, can we ask the LLM to help us with that? It makes us faster at that job. But the nice thing is that we can easily detect if it's doing it incorrectly, because we'll look at what it's suggesting. And if it's doing it wrong, we'll know not to publish that without, some tweaks. But it's also nice because if it does it wrong and we just try and try and try, we just cannot get it to do the work we want. We know how to fix it because this is the thing we already do for a living. So it helps make people faster. Now, the second one is achieving new heights. So I don't really know how to generate video. I'm not particularly good at statistics, but I am able to go to GPT and say, can you help me with a seasonality analysis on this data set? And it will do the work for you, but you can also ask it to explain how it did it. Why did you choose a certain statistical model? Why did you include this data and exclude that data? And the thing here is curiosity of people is really important. So if you're curious and you're interested in learning this and understanding what it's doing, then this is really good as a teacher, and it can help you scale new heights and do things that were possibly too time consuming to be possible for you. And that's good because if it's doing something weird, you'll probably be able to detect it because you're asking questions. Now, if you're like, hey, my boss just asked me for a seasonality analysis and I've never done this before, but hey, GPT can do it for me. You put in the command and you just copy and paste the email back to your boss. Well, it may have gotten it wrong. And if you didn't care to be curious, to ask questions, to evaluate what it was doing, that's when you're going to make mistakes. And this is due to hallucinations, which we all know about, but fewer people know about the concept of drift. And so drift is the fact that if you ask an LLM the same question multiple times, the answers are going to be slightly different. And when it comes to text generation, that's probably okay. But if you ask it a mathematical question, like is a certain number a prime number, 80% of the time it's going to get that correct, and 20% of the time it's not going to get it correct. And day over day, the frequency of it being correct is actually going to change. And this is called drift in the systems. And so this is something they're trying to address, but it is a big problem. So you do have to fact check what it is spitting out as an answer, because otherwise you're going to fall flat on your face and potentially get fired.
Yeah, very costly mistakes potentially to be made there. And yeah, that's just that point at the bottom of that slide, just about taking shortcuts and trying to get it to do things where you're really unable to evaluate what might be wrong with the output. But in the interest of time, obviously there are risks associated with using Gen AI the wrong way, but there are also risks to marketers due to the way that Gen AI is changing the makeup of internet traffic. So there are multiple reports that have come out this year just showing that LLMs and AI are leading to a surge in the amount of bot traffic online. Two of those are represented on the slide here. Both of those resources are in the docs tab as well if you want to take a closer look at them. And when you think about it, it is one of the most obvious consequences or outcomes of the proliferation of this new technology. I'm not going to dwell a huge amount of time on this just because I do want to save some time for the Q&A at the end. But to recap some of the main takeaways and highlights from the Imperva Bad Bot reports, you can see the headline of that on the slide here. They found that for the first time in a decade, automated traffic surpassed human activity, accounting for 51% of all web traffic in 2024, which they attributed largely due to the influence of LLMs and AI. Bad bot activity, as opposed to good bot activity, such as web indexing crawlers and that kind of thing, that has risen for the 6th consecutive year, with malicious bots now accounting for 37% of all internet traffic, increasing from 32% the year before. So as I said, I'm not going to dwell on that too long, but I'm just going to go on the next slide here. And following on from the previous slide, I just want to quickly illustrate how Lunio helps to reduce exposure to bot traffic. So the graph you're seeing on screen here was created by our data science team, and it's customer data, which we needed to anonymize in this case. But I can say that this customer sells home appliances, which need to be installed and have a very high price point. So their primary conversion type is a lead form fill rather than a direct sale through an online checkout. And they were experiencing very high volumes of spam leads, which was what motivated them to partner with Lunio to protect their paid traffic in the first place. And on the blue line here on the graph, you can see that tracks their combined cross-channel invalid traffic rate, and it compares it to the invalid traffic rate of the average unprotected business from April 2024 to April 25. The red line represents the unprotected IVT rate averaged across all the monitor-only accounts at Lunio, where we are analyzing the traffic that comes in, but our automated blocking and protection is not switched on. The green and yellow lines on the other side of that red line are the upper and lower confidence intervals. You'll also immediately notice this big spike in IVT and bot traffic, which kicks in right around the start of October, which corresponds with the peak holiday season. So Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Christmas, New Year sales. We tend to always see an inevitable uptick in bot activity at that time of year. But you can see throughout that period, the customer's IVT rate remained significantly lower than the average unprotected account. So the weekly IVT rate for the protected customer was 3.68%. The average weekly IVT rate for an unprotected account was 8.05%. And when we look at that 12 months worth of data, this customer was exposed to 54% less invalid traffic compared to the average unprotected business, helping them to really minimize wasted ad spend, but also tackle that issue of spam leads that they were having. So if you are interested to find out where your own invalid traffic rate sits currently, you can request a 2-week traffic audit with Lunio, where we will monitor and analyze all the different paid traffic channels that you're using and deliver a report which summarizes the key invalid traffic data that we uncover. So there is a link to get a traffic audit with Lunio in the docs tab if you are interested. But that is it for the content, and we're going to move on. And we might run over by 5 minutes for the Q&A because I do want to give people a chance to get their questions in. But I will just open the Q&A tab here, and I will bring the first question up on screen. One sec. So we have a question here from Khan. I've seen many videos on YouTube and LinkedIn where people use AI to analyze data and generate reports. My question is, how can we trust the results? If we still need to verify every number calculation and source manually, doesn't that significantly reduce the value of using AI in the first place? What's your take on this, Fred?
Yeah, so I like to speak about OpenAI because that's the one I use most, but like the code interpreter or the data analysis component that they have will actually write the Python code to do this type of analysis. And what's key is that the first time you do it, you should verify using some other method that it's correct. Or if you have the ability to read some of the code, you should look through it. You can even ask the system, can you actually comment the code so that I understand, like in a human flow, how you're analyzing the data. But what's nice is that it's writing Python code. And again, this is deterministic. So if you say 1 + 1 equals, the way an LLM does that, it doesn't actually do math. It figures out that there's a probabilistic thing that it could be 3, it could be 1, but there's a higher probability it's 2, right? And that's where it gets risky. But because you're actually asking it to write the Python code that does the analysis, that is deterministic, that is doing actual math. 1 + 1 is always going to be 2. So if the code it's writing is correct, then no matter what numbers you put into it, the outcome is always going to be correct too. The other thing, once you've generated that Python code, once you've generated the actual deterministic code, save it. Don't go back to the LLM the next time and say, hey, can you help me with this analysis again? Because it's going to generate a new bunch of Python code, which could have mistakes. So if you've already verified it once, grab that code, save it, and that can now become part of your process. So that's the cleanest way to get around this.
Nice. So we have another question here from Jonathan. For someone who is late to the AI game and wants to get up to speed fast for automating digital marketing tasks, are there any resources or tools you'd recommend people starting with first, Fred, the kind of low-hanging fruit, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, follow the people that have been mentioned, read Search Engine Land. But honestly, ask the LLM. It's actually going to give you probably really good answers. And some of the LLMs are more frequently updated. So I would say, like, what are some low-hanging fruit that I can tackle with the current systems?
Nice. And I guess that might be similar to this question about just could you elaborate on connecting Google Ads to LLM? So I guess like the first protocol there would be to check out Fred's article on Search Engine Land. If you want to go a bit deeper on that, Fred does elaborate in quite a lot of detail in that Search Engine Land about how to connect Google Ads to LLMs. But Fred, is there anything else that you would say there on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest one and the most controlled one is to use a Google ad script where you tell it what report you needed to pull, and then you have the prompt in there. So it's all very controlled. That's the easiest way to connect it. And again, that's in an automated manner, right? Like the easiest way to do it is just literally download the report as a CSV and put it as an attachment to the LLM and say, this is your grounding, only use this data. That's going to work as well, but it's not as scalable.
And the next question that we have is from Tanner. So again, it is fairly similar. Like, what task as a PPC manager should I be aiming to automate or give to an LLM of all the kind of routine tasks that are usually on a PPC manager's to-do list?
Yeah. And so like you said, Tanner, it's the basics like keywords, ads. That's the stuff everybody's been thinking about for a long time. And I've written some blog posts like 2 years ago, which was like, here's like 9 basic things that you can do using LLMs. That's a good starting point. And basically, I think about like targeting, bidding, creative. You think about those buckets, and then what are the tasks that you think an LLM might be good at? But then what are the blind spots? And that's where you have to get a bit more creative. So Corey Lidholm was on a session on one of my podcasts, and he was talking about seasonality analysis, and that's something I've never really done before. But he showed me how easy that was to do with an LLM. I was like, yeah, that's really sweet. Now I can do that for any client in a matter of minutes. And so I think paying attention to the experts, but also paying attention to your clients and to traditional marketing, like the seasonality analysis is not a particularly novel thing. But I think a lot of people have just blocked it out from their minds because it's not something we've historically done a lot in PPC or SEO. And so go to the LLM and say, is this something you could help me with? And it'll probably come back with a positive answer. And then, I'm always thinking too about I can be a better marketer if I have the rest of my life taken care of better. And so one kind of random example, but I have 3 kids who are in middle school or elementary school. All the teachers send me emails about, okay, you need to know this, and this is the homework, and there's this activity. And I keep missing out on that stuff. And then, people are upset at me. So I'm like, well, what if I could use LLMs to summarize this so that I don't have to look for these random emails coming out throughout the week? So I label emails from the school in Gmail, I give it a label, and then I use Zapier, and it looks for emails with that label. It uses OpenAI and Zapier to summarize each email, and it puts it in a digest. Once a day, at the end of the day, I get one email that summarizes the key things I need to know from all of those teachers. And I was like, I could take this one step further. In Zapier, I can actually get that email summary narrated using the Whisper API from OpenAI. And all of this you can do directly in Zapier. So you now narrate that email and you stick it into a podcast. So I can listen to what I need to know in the car. And that's the kind of stuff where it's like, I just identified a problem and I said, could LLMs and new technology solve this for me to make me more efficient as a person so that I can focus more on the things that actually matter more to me, that need my brain power?
Yeah, I didn't expect the parent-teacher evening to come in, but that's a great use case there. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to go through 2 more questions here before we wrap up and finish. So this was a question that I saw was dropped in the chat, and then I appreciate Ayub. Apologies if I haven't pronounced your name correctly, but what is your response, Fred, to people that say that this is the end of marketing agencies, Google Ads marketing agencies in particular, especially for those who say that search engines are dying due to AI chatbots like ChatGPT and Perplexity, but also for those that complain that platforms like Google make things exceptionally easy for non-experts to manage. Not to mention the fact that we see less to give maximum data to the AI. Sorry, I might have misread the end of your question there, but generally, Fred, like this point about making agencies less relevant, and there's a lot of talk as well about search engines, or their market share is going to be eaten up by AI chatbots like ChatGPT and Perplexity, but I think there's still a long way to go on that one.
Yeah, for sure. And so I'm laughing because I got the book on my desk here, but this is my second book, Unlevel the Playing Field. It's basically because Google is leveling how easy it is for everyone to get decent enough results in marketing. But the reality is there's still things that we as professionals can do to unlevel the playing field back in our favor. And I think I'll give you Performance Max as one example. Like Performance Max was supposed to be like that easy button where you just put in a handful of things. But every time Google keeps adding more and more to it, and like running a successful PMax campaign, at a base level, sure, it's easy to get average results, but if you use all the toggles that Google gives you, there's so much more you can do, right? And that's where I think I'm hopeful that as professional marketers, we still have a role to play. In terms of the web dying, I think we need to, yes, the roles that we play today, absolutely dying, right? Like the way that we get to a conversion, that is changing, and that is changing because the way that consumers get to a conversion is different. It's no longer like, who likes searching and clicking on 10 blue links, right? That's still where SEO shows, but who as a consumer likes that? Show me one person who legitimately likes that better than the LLM experience. And sure, LLMs get it wrong sometimes, and sure, there's mistakes, right? All of these things are going to get figured out, but like from a user experience perspective, you cannot tell me that this new way is worse than the old way. So we have to figure out, how do we work in a world where keywords don't exist anymore because people don't put in keywords, they put in prompts. Yeah, sure, they're words, but it's kind of a different way of using words. There's more memory attached to prompts, right? So all of these things are shifting, but at the end of the day, what the consumer is trying to do is get someone to fix their leaky toilet or buy a new pair of running sneakers. So I think we as marketers still have opportunities to help make those connections, but how we get there, we have to be ready for like a sea change that's just massive.
Yeah, for sure. It is going to be really significant, and it's not too far away. So I'll just bring up our final question here from Tate. Fred, you talked about how we can automate linking multiple GPTs, custom GPTs together to do multiple steps at once. You referred to the blog example where you had different types of custom GPT readers to give you feedback on that. Was this just mentions or GPT actions, or did we not get to that? I might have missed it, but maybe Fred, could you talk about like, the application that you gave for providing that fact checking and reading a blog that you might have written is very helpful for me in content and for anyone that creates content, or you might work in SEO. Is there any way that same kind of workflow could be really useful for a kind of routine task that a PPC manager might be doing, or get them to look at? Could you do the same thing for maybe like a client report or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what I can do is I can spend maybe the next week writing up a blog post that details how this works, because I know people are also saying it's kind of hard to understand without a visual. So let me put something together. We'll send it out to the audience. But yeah, I mean, I think the concept here is what's important is that you can build multiple GPTs with actions, and you can sort of sequence them to fire in order and work with each other, and just give you as the human the final output of what they agreed upon. And so absolutely applicable. Like if you're trying to do a client report, yes, you should have a custom GPT that knows the nuances of how that client likes to get their reports. How sophisticated are they? Can we talk to them about like offline conversion import, or is that going to be way over their heads? So you put all of that in. And then obviously you can have multiple GPTs that sort of prep the information for that final one that then like puts the nice the bow on it in the language that actually makes sense for that customer. And by the way, again, a little pitch here for Optmyzr, but this is what we're putting in Optmyzr. So all of these capabilities are in there. If you don't want to figure out how to build the tech, that's where we come in, right? But I'm also excited. I'm a technologist. So if anyone wants to do this themselves, like I think it's exciting because you can, and you don't have to pay someone for it.
Nice. Well, that is it for today. I think we'll need to wrap up there, but I just wanted to say massive thank you to you, Fred, for joining us today and giving us all plenty of food for thought there. And I'm looking forward to seeing that blog post when it comes out about the use cases of collecting and linking those custom GPTs together in PPC. But before we wrap up, Fred, is there anything else you'd like to point people towards? I can see a few people in the chat there recommending your book, and definitely check out On Level the Playing Field if you're interested in that. But anything else, Fred, you'd signpost people towards?
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. That's a great place to stay up on top of what I'm publishing. So, but thanks everyone for spending an hour with me. This has been great. I hope I've inspired you to do one or two things that are going to make your life more effective.
Perfect. And if you have any questions for us, you can contact us directly via hello@lunio.ai, and we'll be happy to help you out there. As I mentioned before, if you are interested in getting a demo of Lunio, you can find the link to request a traffic audit in the docs tab. And lastly, big thanks to everyone in the audience yet again for tuning in, whether you're here live or if you're watching back on demand. I hope to see you again at our next webinar, which will be happening towards the end of July. So be on the lookout for that. I can't announce the guest just yet, but it is going to be a good one. But for now, take care, everyone, and all the best with your GenAI experimentation in PPC. Thanks, guys.